The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the aroma of reheated casseroles as the morning light filtered through the narrow windows of St. Catherine's Medical Research Hospital. At 5:30 a.m., when the corridors were still empty and the only sounds were the distant hum of machines keeping patients alive, Martha Washington moved through the cafeteria kitchen with the same quiet precision she had maintained for the past 8 years. Her weathered hands arranged serving trays in perfect rows, her movements efficient and practiced. To the doctors, nurses, and researchers who would soon fill these halls, she was invisible. Just another part of the hospital machinery, like the coffee makers and the fluorescent lights. But what they didn't know was that behind her tired eyes and beneath her hairnet was one of the most brilliant minds they would ever encounter. Martha had learned long ago that survival meant becoming part of the background, blending into the institutional beige walls and sterile surfaces that defined her world. She served meals to Nobel Prize winners, cleared tables where groundbreaking research was discussed, and listened to conversations that could change the future of medicine. But no one asked for her opinion. No one wondered what she thought about the complex problems they debated over their lunch trays. She was the lunch lady. That was her place, and everyone seemed content to keep it that way. Before we dive into Martha's incredible journey, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about genius, about recognition, and about the brilliant minds that exist in places we never think to look. Trust me, Martha's story will change how you see every service worker, every person you pass without a second glance, because sometimes the most powerful mind in the room is wearing an apron instead of a lab coat. The morning routine began like every other for the past 8 years. Martha unlocked the kitchen, started the industrial ovens, and began preparing meals for the army of medical professionals who would descend on the cafeteria throughout the day. St. Catherine's was one of the most prestigious medical research facilities in the country, home to breakthrough cancer research, cutting-edge surgical techniques, and experimental treatments that offered hope to patients from around the world. The hospital's reputation attracted the best and brightest minds in medicine, doctors and researchers whose names appeared in medical journals and whose discoveries saved lives. But Martha noticed things they didn't. She observed patterns in their behavior, listened to their frustrations, and understood their challenges in ways that surprised even her. During her years of invisibility, she had absorbed more medical knowledge than most nursing students ever learned. She knew which research projects were succeeding and which were failing. She could predict which doctors were burning out and which residents weren't going to make it through their rotations. Most importantly, she recognized when the brilliant people around her were stuck on problems that seemed to have no solution. The crisis had been building for weeks in the hospital's prestigious neurology department. Dr. James Mitchell, the department head, had been leading a team of 12 researchers in what was supposed to be a revolutionary study on brain trauma recovery. The project had attracted international attention, secured millions in grant funding, and promised to transform how doctors treated patients with severe head injuries. But something had gone wrong. Terribly, impossibly wrong. Martha first heard about the problem during a staff meeting in late October. She was refilling the coffee station in the small conference room where the neurology team gathered every Tuesday morning, moving quietly around the edges of their intense discussions. Dr. Mitchell's voice carried the weight of desperation as he explained the situation to his colleagues. The algorithm isn't working. 3 months of trials, and we're getting results that make no sense. The neural pathway mapping shows improvement, but the cognitive assessments are showing decline. It's like the treatment is helping and harming patients simultaneously. Dr. Sarah Chin, the lead researcher, leaned forward with frustration evident in her voice. I've run the calculations 17 different ways. The statistical models all point to the same impossible conclusion. According to our data, patients are recovering motor function while losing memory formation capability. That shouldn't be possible. The brain doesn't work that way. Martha paused in her coffee refilling, her hands steady but her mind racing. She had been following their research through overheard conversations, discarded draft papers, and fragments of discussion she pieced together during her daily rounds. The problem they were describing wasn't impossible at all. It was actually quite logical if you understood the relationship between traumatic brain injury recovery and the brain's adaptive mechanisms. But these brilliant doctors seemed to be missing something fundamental about how neuroplasticity actually functioned. Dr. Mitchell rubbed his temples, looking older than his 52 years. The review board meets next week. If we can't explain these results, they're going to shut down the entire program. 3 years of work, $12 million in funding, and most importantly, hundreds of patients who could benefit from this treatment if we can just figure out what's going wrong. Martha finished with the coffee and moved toward the door, but Dr. Chen's next words stopped her in her tracks. Maybe we're approaching this backwards. What if the cognitive decline isn't a side effect of the treatment, but a necessary part of the healing process? What if the brain has to temporarily sacrifice some functions to rebuild others? Martha's breath caught in her throat. Dr. Chen was so close to the truth, but she was still missing the crucial piece. Without thinking, Martha turned slightly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, but have you considered that the memory issues might not be decline at all? They could be temporary reorganization while new neural pathways form around damaged tissue." The room fell silent. 12 pairs of highly educated eyes turned toward the woman in the food service uniform who had just offered insight into one of the most complex medical puzzles they had ever encountered. Dr. Mitchell's eyebrows raised as he studied Martha's face, perhaps noticing her for the first time, despite seeing her every day for years. "I'm sorry," he said with the careful politeness of someone addressing a child who had interrupted an adult conversation. "Did you say something?" Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she couldn't take back the words. She had spent 8 years listening to these conversations, understanding their work better than most of them realized. "The neural reorganization," she repeated quietly. "If the treatment is forcing the brain to create new pathways around damaged areas, temporary memory disruption would be normal, like construction on a highway. Traffic gets rerouted until the new road is finished." A few of the researchers exchanged glances, the kind of look that passes between professionals when a layperson offers advice they couldn't possibly understand. Dr. Chin smiled with condescending kindness. "That's an interesting thought, but brain trauma recovery is a bit more complicated than highway construction. The neural mechanisms involved require years of study to fully understand." Martha nodded and quietly left the room, but inside her chest, something had ignited. Not anger exactly, but a deep frustration born from years of being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated. She knew she was right. More than that, she knew exactly why their research was producing confusing results and exactly how they could fix it. But who would listen to a lunch lady? That evening, Martha sat in her small apartment, surrounded by medical journals she borrowed from the hospital library and notebooks filled with her own observations and theories. The apartment was modest, clean, and lined with bookshelves that told a story most people would never suspect. Neuroscience textbooks sat beside psychology journals. Research papers on brain trauma recovery were carefully organized alongside Martha's own handwritten analyses of treatment outcomes she had observed during her years at the hospital. On her kitchen table sat a weathered manila folder, the kind used for important documents that need to be kept safe. Inside were her diplomas, Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience from Johns Hopkins, Master's in Cognitive Psychology from Stanford, and acceptance letter to the PhD program at Harvard Medical School, dated 15 years ago. Martha opened the folder slowly, like she was handling something fragile and precious. She had been Dr. Martha Washington once, a rising star in neuroscience research, a young woman whose dissertation on neuroplasticity had been published in 3 major journals before she turned 25. But life has a way of derailing even the most promising trajectories. Her younger brother Marcus, barely 18, had been in a car accident that left him with severe brain trauma, the same kind of injury that Dr. Mitchell's team was now studying, searching for treatments that might help patients like Marcus recover their lost abilities. Martha had taken a leave of absence from Harvard to care for Marcus, expecting to return to her studies once he stabilized. But Marcus never stabilized. He needed constant care, multiple surgeries, and rehabilitation that insurance barely covered. Martha's savings disappeared quickly. Her fellowship at Harvard expired. Her research position was filled by someone else. By the time Martha realized that her brother's condition was permanent, that he would need lifelong support, her academic career had evaporated like morning mist. She found work at St. Catherine's because it was the hospital where Marcus had been treated, where she still brought him for follow-up appointments. The cafeteria job offered steady pay, health insurance, and the chance to stay connected to the medical world she had been forced to abandon. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she could figure out how to return to research. But temporary became permanent when Martha realized that Marcus wasn't the only family member who needed her support. For 8 years, Martha had hidden in plain sight, serving meals to researchers who were working on the very problem she had once hoped to solve. She watched breakthrough discoveries happen at the tables where she cleared dishes. She listened to brilliant minds struggle with questions she could answer if anyone had bothered to ask her opinion. Most painfully, she saw patients like Marcus being treated with methods that she knew could be improved. But tonight was different. Tonight, Martha wasn't going to just listen and observe. She opened a fresh notebook and began writing with the precision and clarity that had once made her a rising star in neuroscience. She outlined the flaw in Dr. Mitchell's research design, explained why their results seemed contradictory, and developed a modified treatment protocol that would solve their problem while dramatically improving patient outcomes. Martha worked through the night, drawing on 15 years of experience with brain trauma patients, 8 years of observing treatment outcomes at St. Catherine's, and knowledge she had never stopped acquiring, despite being exiled from the academic world. Her solution wasn't just theoretically sound, it was practical, testable, and based on a deeper understanding of neural recovery than anyone on Dr. Mitchell's team possessed. When Martha finished writing, she sat back and looked at the 10 pages of analysis, equations, and treatment modifications that could save the research program and help countless patients recover from traumatic brain injuries. But she faced the same problem that had silenced her for 8 years. How do you make people listen when they've already decided you don't matter? The answer came to her as she walked to work the next morning. Watching the early shift, doctors hurry through the hospital entrance with their coffee cups and serious expressions. They would never listen to Martha Washington, the lunch lady, but they might pay attention to anonymous research that appeared in their workspace. She didn't need credit or recognition. She just needed them to see the solution. The neurology department's main conference room was empty at 4:30 a.m. when Martha used her universal access key to slip inside. The room where she had been dismissed the day before was quiet and dark, dominated by a large whiteboard covered with equations and diagrams that represented months of failed research. Martha studied their work for a moment, seeing both the brilliance and the critical oversight that had led them astray. She picked up a blue marker and began writing in the empty space at the bottom of the board. Not her name, not an explanation, just the solution. Clean, elegant equations that showed exactly how to modify their treatment protocol. Mathematical proofs that explained why their current results seemed contradictory. A step-by-step methodology for clinical trials that would produce the breakthrough they were desperately seeking. When she finished, Martha stepped back and looked at her work. 10 lines of precise scientific notation that would revolutionize brain trauma treatment and save the research program that employed 12 brilliant doctors. She capped the marker, wiped her fingerprints from its surface, and quietly left the room. Outside, the morning sun was beginning to illuminate the hospital towers, and Martha Washington walked to the cafeteria kitchen to begin another day of being invisible. But this time, she had left something behind that would change everything. Dr. Mitchell arrived at 7:15 a.m. with his usual large coffee and stack of medical journals, expecting another day of frustrating discussions about their failing research. But when he opened the conference room door, he stopped dead in his tracks. There on the whiteboard, written in clean blue ink below their existing equations, was a complete solution to the problem that had been tormenting his team for months. He blinked, stepped closer, and whispered under his breath, "This can't be right." But as he studied the equations, his excitement grew. The mathematical relationships were elegant and precise. The treatment modifications addressed every concern they had identified. Most importantly, the solution explained their contradictory results in a way that made perfect sense. Within minutes, Dr. Mitchell was on the phone with Dr. Chin, then Dr. Rodriguez, then the entire research team. Soon, 8 of the country's top neurologists stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the whiteboard and whispering to each other like children who had discovered buried treasure. "This isn't just correct," Dr. Chin said, her voice filled with awe. "This is brilliant. But none of us wrote this. Who could have accessed our research? Who understands neural recovery at this level?" Dr. Mitchell was already pulling security footage on his tablet, fast-forwarding through the night's recordings. There, at 4:47 a.m., was a small figure in a food service uniform, moving purposefully through the hallway with a key card and entering their conference room. The timestamp showed she had been inside for exactly 43 minutes. "The lunch lady," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "Martha. She was in here this morning." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dr. Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "That's impossible. Food service workers don't have access to advanced neuroscience research. They don't understand neural pathway mathematics." But there was the evidence, written clearly on their whiteboard in handwriting that didn't belong to anyone on their team. Dr. Chin took a photo of the equations and posted it to the hospital's secure research network with a simple question, "Does anyone recognize this work?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Colleagues from across the hospital replied with amazement, calling the solution groundbreaking and asking who had developed such an innovative approach. By afternoon, news of the mysterious equations had spread beyond St. Catherine's. Medical researchers across the country were analyzing the solution, confirming its validity, and demanding to know who had solved one of the most challenging problems in neuroscience recovery research. The story went viral in academic circles, spawning theories about secret research teams, artificial intelligence, and visiting scholars who preferred to remain anonymous. But Dr. Mitchell couldn't let it go. He spent the rest of the day researching Martha Washington, the quiet woman who served his lunch every day, but whom he had never really seen. What he discovered would shake his understanding of genius, recognition, and the brilliant minds that exist in places where no one thinks to look. The employee record showed that Martha had worked at St. Catherine's for 8 years, consistently receiving excellent performance reviews and demonstrating unusual knowledge of medical procedures and patient care. But it was her emergency contact information that led Dr. Mitchell to the first clue about her true background. Listed as her brother was Marcus Washington, a patient in the hospital's long-term care facility, someone Dr. Mitchell recognized as one of the most severe traumatic brain injury cases they had treated. A deeper search through academic databases revealed the shocking truth. Dr. Martha Louise Washington, Johns Hopkins University, Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience, summa cum laude. Stanford University, Master's in Cognitive Psychology, thesis on neural adaptation mechanisms in trauma recovery. Harvard Medical School acceptance, fellowship in advanced neuroscience research. Published papers on brain plasticity that were still being cited in current research. Dr. Mitchell sat in his office, staring at the screen that displayed Martha's academic credentials, trying to reconcile the brilliant researcher described in these documents with the quiet woman who had been serving him lunch for 8 years. Her published work was groundbreaking, her research methodology innovative, her insights into neural recovery mechanisms exactly what his team needed to advance their current project. But the trail went cold after her Harvard acceptance. No graduation, no continued publications, no record of her completing the PhD program she had been admitted to with highest honors. Dr. Martha Washington had simply vanished from the academic world. as if she had never existed. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell approached Martha's serving station with nervous energy, unsure how to begin a conversation that would acknowledge what he had discovered. Martha looked up from arranging fruit cups, her expression calm and professional, showing no sign that she had spent the previous evening revolutionizing neuroscience research. "Martha," Dr. Mitchell began, his voice carefully controlled, "I was wondering if we could talk about the work you left on our whiteboard yesterday morning." Martha's hands stilled for just a moment, then continued their methodical arrangement of the lunch display. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dr. Mitchell. I just serve food." The conference room was small and private, away from the curious eyes of staff and researchers who had been buzzing with speculation about the mysterious equations. Martha sat across from Dr. Mitchell, her posture straight and her expression guarded, like someone who had learned to protect herself from disappointment. Dr. Mitchell placed a printed copy of Martha's academic record on the table between them. "We know who you are," he said quietly. "Dr. Martha Washington, neuroscience researcher, published expert on brain trauma recovery. The question is, why are you here? Why are you serving lunch instead of leading research?" Martha looked at the papers without touching them, her face revealing nothing of the emotions that were churning inside her chest. Because research doesn't pay for round-the-clock care for a brain-damaged brother. Because PhD programs don't offer health insurance for family members. Because choosing love over career means accepting that the world will forget you ever existed. She finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Martha Louise Washington. I graduated from Johns Hopkins 15 years ago, top of my class. I was accepted to Harvard Medical School with a full fellowship and research assistantship. I was supposed to change the world, or at least that's what my professors told me." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, sensing that he was about to hear a story that would change his understanding of sacrifice and brilliance. "My brother Marcus was 18 when he had his accident. Traumatic brain injury, the same kind your research is trying to treat. He needed someone to advocate for him, to make sure he received proper care, to be there during the long recovery process that insurance companies don't want to pay for." Martha's voice remained steady, but her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. "I took a leave of absence from Harvard, thinking it would be temporary, just until Marcus stabilized. But Marcus never stabilized. He needed surgery, rehabilitation, constant monitoring. The medical bills were overwhelming. My fellowship expired. My research position was filled. By the time I realized that Marcus would need lifelong care, my academic career was over." The room was quiet, except for the distant sounds of the hospital, the hum of machines and murmur of voices that formed the backdrop of Martha's daily life. "I came to work at St. Catherine's because this is where Marcus was treated. I wanted to stay close to the medical community, to understand new developments that might help him. And I needed steady work with health insurance that would cover his ongoing care." Dr. Mitchell felt a weight settling in his chest as he began to understand the magnitude of what Martha had sacrificed. "You've been here 8 years, listening to our research, watching our progress, knowing you could contribute, but unable to speak up." Martha nodded slowly. "I've watched breakthrough discoveries happen at the tables where I serve lunch. I've listened to brilliant minds struggle with problems I could solve, if anyone thought to ask the lunch lady for her opinion. Your research team has been working on neural recovery for 3 years, making the same fundamental error in their approach that I recognized within the first month." Dr. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed by the realization of how much expertise they had been overlooking. "The solution you provided, it's not just correct, it's revolutionary. This could change how we treat brain trauma patients worldwide." Martha smiled sadly. "That's what I hoped when I started this research 15 years ago, to help patients like Marcus, to find treatments that could restore function and hope to families like mine. But life had different plans." The story Martha told over the next hour would reshape Dr. Mitchell's understanding of genius, sacrifice, and the brilliant minds that exist in unexpected places. She explained how she had continued learning throughout her years at the hospital, how she had observed patient outcomes and identified patterns that the medical staff missed. She had been conducting unofficial research for 8 years, developing insights that could revolutionize treatment protocols if anyone had bothered to listen. But Martha's story was more than just personal sacrifice. It was about systemic problems and how society values different kinds of work, how economic necessity can silence brilliant voices, and how the most important contributions sometimes come from people who have been rendered invisible by circumstance. Dr. Mitchell realized that St. Catherine's hadn't just employed a lunch lady for 8 years. They had unknowingly hired one of the country's leading experts on brain trauma recovery, someone whose insights could advance their research by decades if they were willing to listen. The offer he made to Martha was unprecedented in the hospital's history. Not just recognition or acknowledgement, but the opportunity to return to the research she had been forced to abandon. A position as lead researcher on the Neural Recovery Project, with a salary that would ensure Marcus received the best possible care while allowing Martha to contribute her expertise to helping other families facing similar challenges. But Martha's response surprised him. She needed time to think, she said. For 8 years, she had built a life around being invisible, around serving others while hiding her own gifts. The prospect of stepping back into the spotlight, of being recognized for her brilliance, was both thrilling and terrifying. That evening, Martha sat beside Marcus's bed in the long-term care facility, holding his hand and talking to him about the decision she faced. Marcus couldn't respond, couldn't offer advice, but his presence reminded her of why she had made the choices that led her to this moment. The next morning brought a surprise that would complicate Martha's decision even further. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the chief of neuroscience at Harvard Medical School, had flown in specifically to speak with her. Dr. Harper had been following the story of the mysterious equations, had recognized Martha's name from her graduate school records, and had come to offer something unprecedented. Harvard wanted Martha back, not as a student, but as a faculty member. They wanted to offer her a full professorship, research funding, and the opportunity to establish her own laboratory focused on neural recovery research. The position came with resources Martha had never dreamed of accessing, including funding for Marcus's care and the chance to work with the most advanced equipment and brightest minds in neuroscience. But Dr. Harper's offer came with a revelation that would shake Martha's understanding of her own story. The research Martha had been forced to abandon 15 years earlier hadn't been forgotten. Dr. Harper had been following her work, had continued building on her insights, and had been trying to locate her for years to offer collaboration and recognition. Martha's disappearance from academia hadn't gone unnoticed. Her professors had been concerned, had tried to reach out, had even established a fund to support students facing family emergencies. But Martha had been so overwhelmed by Marcus's needs, so focused on survival, that she had cut ties with the academic world completely. The choice Martha faced was more complex than simply returning to research. She had to decide whether she was ready to leave the life she had built at St. Catherine's, the relationships she had formed with patients and colleagues, the daily routine that had given structure to her sacrifice. But she also had to consider the impact her research could have on families like her own, the treatments she could develop, the hope she could offer to people facing traumatic brain injuries. The decision came to her as she walked through the hospital cafeteria one final time as an employee. Students from the medical school, residents learning their craft, seasoned doctors advancing their careers, all moving through the space where she had been invisible for 8 years. But now she saw something different in their faces. Some of them recognized her, nodded with respect, understood that brilliance doesn't always wear a lab coat. Martha's final day as a lunch lady was unlike any other in her 8 years at St. Catherine's. Word had spread throughout the hospital about her true identity and her groundbreaking contribution to neuroscience research. As she moved through her usual routine, doctors and nurses approached her with a mixture of awe and embarrassment, realizing they had been ignoring one of the most qualified people in the building. But it was the patients who affected Martha most deeply. Marcus's roommate, a young woman recovering from a stroke, grabbed Martha's hand and whispered, Thank you for not giving up on people like us." That moment crystallized Martha's decision. She would accept the research position not for recognition or career advancement, but for the families who needed hope and the patients who deserved better treatments. The press conference announcing Martha's appointment as Director of Neural Recovery Research at St. Catherine's was unlike anything the hospital had ever hosted. Medical journalists from across the country attended, drawn by the story of the lunch lady who had revolutionized neuroscience while hidden in plain sight. But Martha's speech wasn't about her personal journey or professional vindication. Instead, she spoke about the brilliant minds that exist in unexpected places, the expertise that develops through lived experience, and the importance of listening to voices that are often dismissed or overlooked. She challenged the medical community to recognize that genius doesn't always come with degrees and titles, that wisdom can be found in the most unlikely circumstances, and that the next breakthrough might come from someone they would never think to ask. Martha's story became a catalyst for change throughout the medical field. Hospitals began creating programs to identify and utilize the knowledge of staff members who had been overlooked. Medical schools developed initiatives to support students facing family crises, ensuring that economic hardship didn't derail promising careers. Most importantly, the research Martha had hidden for 8 years began saving lives, helping patients like Marcus recover function and hope. But the most significant change was in Martha herself. She had spent 8 years believing that her academic career was over, that her potential had been wasted, that she had failed to achieve the greatness her professors had predicted. Now she understood that her years in the cafeteria hadn't been a detour from her destined path. They had been preparation for work that was more important than anything she could have accomplished as a traditional researcher. Martha's research laboratory, funded by grants she had only dreamed of accessing, became a model for collaborative neuroscience research, but she insisted on maintaining connections to the service staff, the patients, and the families who had shaped her understanding of what healing really meant. Her greatest innovations came not from expensive equipment or advanced degrees, but from listening to the people who lived with brain trauma every day. 6 months after Martha's transformation from lunch lady to leading researcher, she received a call that would reveal the final piece of her story. The caller was Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago who had been following Martha's research for years. But Dr. Martinez wasn't calling about collaboration or congratulations. She was calling with information about Marcus's accident that would change everything Martha thought she knew about her brother's condition. The accident that had ended Marcus's promising future and derailed Martha's academic career hadn't been random bad luck. Dr. Martinez had been investigating the pattern of suspicious brain injuries affecting young black men in their community, injuries that shared characteristics with Marcus's case. What she had discovered was evidence of a systematic problem that reached far beyond individual tragedies. Martha's sacrifice, her years of invisible service, her breakthrough research were all connected to a larger story about medical care, social justice, and the communities that had been underserved by the very institutions that claimed to help them. The lunch lady who had solved what no one else could was about to discover that her greatest challenge wasn't behind her, it was just beginning. Because sometimes brilliance isn't just about finding solutions to complex problems. Sometimes it's about having the courage to ask why those problems exist in the first place and what it means to fight for justice when the people with power have spent years pretending you don't exist. Martha Washington had spent 8 years being invisible, but her story was about to become impossible to ignore. And the choices she made in the coming weeks would determine not just her own future, but the lives of countless patients who needed someone brave enough to challenge a system that had failed them. The lunch lady had solved the impossible equation, but the most important work was still ahead of her.